DraftKings team breakdown for best ball. We got the Niners and Commanders today. You ready to do this, Tyson?
Let's
it's episode 7.
Let's do it. Episode 7. Let's do it. What is up, guys? Welcome to the Edge DFS. My name is Tyson Smith, joined by Ellie Hernandez. Ellie, looks like you're somewhere that's not home. Where are you at, man? What's going on with you?
I'm actually in Houston, Texas, doing some work. Was thinking about maybe checking out one of the Texans games this weekend, depending on
Oh, dude, you should.
How work goes. It's $30 for preseason tickets, man.
That's not too bad. And $30 for a beer, too, probably.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, guys. This is episode 7. We are making our way through all these different matchups here. For best ball, we're basically looking at injuries. We're just diving into a deeper look at some of these teams, where their ADP's at. You know, kind of our mindset as we start to draft some of these higher, in first or second round players. Where do we go from there from these teams? Who are we looking for run backs, things like that. I want to start out first by just talking about injuries here. So there's not like a ton to talk about here. Hang on, let me hit the sound here.
Yeah, just pain. It was pain everywhere.
Not a ton to talk about here. So for San Francisco, let's start there. So George Kittle, he's dealing with a little groin injury. It looks like he should play week 1. I'm not too concerned, Elliot. I mean, it seems fine. I'm not too concerned. I know he did have like a similar injury to start last year, and he did miss some games, but it seems like he's on pace to play. And look, let's just say he misses week 1. It's not really going to change my opinion on him, where I'm drafting him, in my opinion, because he's still a top-tier tight end, and you kind of needed him last year to finish the year in best ball. Elijah Mitchell, he's coming back to practice this week. Should be good to go. I feel like I've kind of ignored him because I've seen that Q tag on DraftKings, and I've just I kind of haven't heard any buzz or anything about him, so he kind of sometimes has fallen to the back for me. I know there's a couple guys in our Discord that have been actively drafting him. I'm usually an Eli Mitchell guy. During showdown slates, I'll handcuff the shit out of him with some McCaffrey, and I'm not afraid. I'll show you a lineup here where I did that. I'm not afraid to do that necessarily here. I mean, if you have McCaffrey and you're handcuffing with Elijah Mitchell and McCaffrey's out, well, you might be screwed. But if it's just 1 or 2 games here and there, and you can get a spike week out of him, that's nice. But it looks like he's coming back this week. He had an abductor strain. They actually went out and signed Jeremy McNichols on the 8th. Maybe they're just getting some more depth, maybe some more bodies in camp. I don't think this affects anything that has to do with Elijah Mitchell and his playing time. I think he's a solid. He's going. Where's he going? Like pick 144 right now, 145, something to that effect. The guys he's going around are kind of in similar ranges. I think he's a pretty good option. Who's he going around at that price?
Yeah, I mean, so he's dropped a little bit in ADP. I think that has to do with that Q tag. I think just given his history, that's something that I've been concerned about myself a little bit too.
Yeah.
But looking at him, he's around. Let's see, we got Rashee Rice at 140, MBS at 141. Damian Harris, that's an interesting one to compare him to. I do like Damian Harris, and he's another guy that he's kind of slipping in ADP too, which is very interesting to me. I don't understand we'll get to him when we get to Buffalo, but in this range, we'll talk about it a little bit. But in this range, I have no problem taking some of these guys. Another guy that's in this range though is Raheem Mostert. And then Tyler Algier. Those are at the running back level. You got Darnell Mooney at wide receiver too. So it's a good range, man. I like that spot, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and there have been some question marks, sort of in that race, especially with Mostert and some of those Miami guys. Now that we've seen Zeke and Dalvin sign, now things are kind of falling into place. I think we could start actually, some of these teams we're going to be more comfortable drafting running backs. But look, Elijah Mitchell should be fine. And look, obviously Purdy. We all know what happened with Purdy. Fucked up his elbow in the NFC Championship game. There was rumors that, maybe he's going to miss a couple weeks. And we had talked about this in one of our drafting best ball shows that we did, where we're kind of talking about, hey, Purdy's probably not going to play the first few weeks. Who's gonna start? Like, who can we grab in a later round as an early season guy that we might get a couple weeks out of? And originally it's like, okay, maybe Lance may be the guy. And we've slowly seen that that is not the case. That you even mentioned it in an episode, I think it was like 2 months ago. And you're like, dude, Darnold's gonna start if he does, if Purdy is out. But I think we're gonna be okay. It doesn't look like he is gonna be out. But look, I think if you wanted to take a flyer on a dude, Darnold probably would be that guy. But I don't even know if that's worth a round 20 pick if he's going to start 1 or 2 games, to me, in my opinion. So as far as San Francisco, that's pretty much all the injuries that I've seen, fantasy-wise. Now, for Washington, we got Logan Thomas. Earlier on, like a month or two ago, I was like super excited to draft Logan Thomas in the 20th round. He wasn't even being drafted. And I loved throwing him in with either as a run back to my San Francisco Purdy stacks or as a last piece to my Washington stacks. He could miss week 1. He's got a calf strain. He's a veteran player at this point. He's been in the league for years. He hasn't been healthy recently. They got John Bates. I think they have a 2022 draft pick, I think in the 3rd or 4th round tight end there as well. So what are your thoughts on Logan Thomas, man? It's a little iffy. I mean, look, if you're getting him in the 20th round, it's not really the biggest deal. But I'm not as high on him as I was because I don't think he's going to see the field. He might miss a few games, right?
Yeah, well, Logan Thomas is an interesting one. Despite the injury, they have a couple other guys. They have Cole Turner there that they like, and he's going to get a little bit of run. I think the way to approach it is you shouldn't, if you've got 20 lineups, you shouldn't have 20 picks of Logan Thomas. If you like the tight end situation that much, you should be filtering in a little bit of Cole Turner. So somebody that we saw on Twitter, Eagles with a bunch of Z's, I think people know who he is, but he was talking about not having more than like 15 to 18% of anybody in these later rounds just to protect himself, right? He was joking about how much Terrace Marshall he had last year, and if he wasn't actively playing or avoiding him this year, he would have been screwed, right? Because he probably would have had like 45%.
Yeah.
So just rotate some of those guys in there.
All right, so now we're going over to narratives here. So basically, this section, I want to talk about things going into the season that we may be concerned about, just general football things, and also kind of some of these players that we, maybe high or low on, depending on kind of the situation around what's going on in camp. So the first thing that comes to mind with these two teams is Washington, and you got a bunch of bitches on the Commanders bitching about working too hard with Bieniemy coming in. To me, it's silly. I mean, I don't know how big, like the media could be blowing this out of proportion. Maybe one coach said something. I don't know. Maybe they're using this. Maybe Rivera is using this in the media to fire up his guys. I don't know what's going on. But if people are complaining about a Super Bowl winning assistant coach coming in to change the culture and make your team better, and you're worried about working too hard or he's hurting your feelings, that's gonna. I mean, maybe this isn't a big deal. But that kind of shows me a little bit about this team. I don't know what to expect. But what are your thoughts on this, man? This is I laughed when I heard this.
I think there's a lot of youth on the Washington Commanders. So I think it's easy to kind of get a bit of a culture shock. Dan Snyder was known for just being a notoriously bad owner and just driving that organization into the ground. So it could really just be tied into having professionals in the building now, and that really is a culture shock. I mean, have you ever had a shitty job where you have a new boss come in and
start changing shit,
dress code, and,
yeah,
just treating it like a real job? Like that shit's weird, and it can be a culture shock.
Yeah,
but I mean, you had Tyreek Hill, Nicole Hardman? Also, they came out in defense of Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people are sleeping on the fact this is Eric Bieniemy's tryout, right? This is what he's trying out to be a head coach next year.
Yes,
that's that. So I think they're gonna let it loose. I think once he gets the buy-in of that team, that offense is gonna be fun to watch. So I think it's going to get blown out of proportion. The media just likes to have a narrative going.
Yeah, and speaking of Bieniemy, like I'm excited to see this offense. There are some question marks, obviously, but they have a pretty solid set of skill players. Like this team can actually overachieve. We just don't know much about Sam Howell and how he's going to hold up. But having a guy like Bieniemy in, guys like Gibson, You know, like, is he a McKinnon type role? Is he going to get a lot more pass opportunities out of the backfield? I'm more excited about this offense now with Bieniemy. And look, there's not a lot of pressure on Bieniemy, in my opinion. If this offense improves a little bit, even, you know, this is his audition for this job, the head coaching job of Washington. I know everybody says, oh, Rivera brought him in. He knew what he was doing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but do we know that for a fact? Like, new ownership coming in, they want to give this guy a shot, give him a year trial, let him take over if they suck ass overall. I don't know. That's just my thought on it. So there's that. Maybe we get some better offense out of Washington this year. That would be nice. Debo last year didn't have the best year. We all know that. But he seemed to have trimmed down. He seems to be taking things a lot more serious. Dude sending shirtless photos to his coach. Debo, to me, is, you know, he's not really the wide receiver one. Ayuk is. Debo's the hybrid, you know, whatever you need the dude on the field, and that could be incredible. We all saw his season 2 years ago. We know what he's capable of. But where he's going is actually, like, not bad. Like, he's going around 35. That's not bad. He's going 16 picks ahead of McLaurin, though. And I think the only reason why that's happening is maybe just the question marks at quarterback. But look, let's just be honest here. San Francisco has some question marks as well. So Debo, you know, we'll talk about him here in a minute, how we like him, how we don't. But I think he's kind of going in an interesting range. Now, Purdy will be ready for week 1. That we've already talked about that. Thoughts on Purdy going into the season? Are you confident he can have a good sophomore outing? And it's kind of hard when you got all the pressure on you and you're the guy. You know, how does he perform?
Yeah, it can be hard. I think that he's got a lot going for him, considering he plays in the NFC West. He at least gets to play the Cardinals twice, the Rams twice. The Rams defense is going to suck dick for free at parties. So I really don't know. Same with the Cardinals. Those could be the two worst defenses in the league easily.
Yep.
So you're going to have 4 games against them. And that right there is enough for me to make me want to take him in fantasy. And because of where he's at, his ADP, which has gone up since he's been announced the starter, but we've been taking him all summer, right?
Yeah.
So where he's at in ADP, you're not reaching anything. Like you can grab him. You can even grab Sam Howell and then a third quarterback if you want to do a punt quarterback build, which we'll talk about. But I like Brock Purdy, especially if, you know, he plays the whole season. If he doesn't, I even have a little bit of exposure to Sam Darnold. That was really early on.
Yeah.
But again, like, I also don't think that's a terrible idea, especially if you have like an elite quarterback. Because we don't know the industry history with Brock Purdy. Maybe his arm is a little bit sore for the first 3 weeks. Yeah. So having Sam Darnold might be enough to ball out for the first couple of weeks. Overall, though, I like Purdy. I think that he's going to have a chance to do something pretty good this season. The West, the NFC in general sucks. So he doesn't have much competition, man.
Yeah, by default, he could, you know, playing in that division alone is going to pad his numbers for sure. Let's get into this breakdown. Break it down. All right, so obviously CMC is going at pick 3. He kind of started things off going around, you know, pick 2-ish, and even now, sometimes he gets taken at pick 2. I've seen him drop to 7. You know, so it's one of those things with CMC. It all depends on your opinion on him. We know his injury history. If he stays healthy, if he's 17-game kind of guy, he's going to be the number 1 running back fantasy-wise. I mean, it's just unless he gets hurt, he's the guy. He's going to get a ton of receptions out of the backfield. He's going to get a ton of touchdown opportunities. And I'm not worried about any of these other guys taking those opportunities away from him. He's going to eat. He's number 3. How much CMC do you have? And every time that you're pick number 3 or every time he falls to you, you're taking him every time, right?
So I don't know if I can say every time because I only have 4%. I think that's 3 lineups.
That could be just your situation though, you know, like where you're picking. It's just unlucky.
Yeah, you're right. I got a lot of pick 2 and 3. And so I was taking Jamar Chase early on, and this was before CMC was 3 or 4. I think there was somebody. I think Cooper Kupp was up there for a little bit too. But yeah. And then, you know, if you're having the bookends, obviously McCaffrey's not falling that low. But Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey. If you can get him, he's a great anchor running back build. If you want to do a hero running back, I think you're fine. But He's going to get involved in the pass game. He's going to average like 18 fantasy points per game. This offense is something. Kyle Shanahan knows what he's doing. He's going to feed Christian McCaffrey. And, I think it's going to be interesting when we talk about Eli Mitchell too, because Eli is going to get he's going to get 30 to 40% of the carries in the backfield. Because CMC is going to line up in the slot. He's going to play receiver. They might do two halfback sets, right? So Kyle Shanahan's creative. Christian McCaffrey's going to eat. I don't think I need to spend much more time talking about him.
Yeah, so when you get Christian McCaffrey at 3, look, a lot of times because you pretty much with your skill players, with these stacks, you got to make decisions early. Like if you're going CMC at pick 3, you could get Debo, but you're going to have to reach. If you're picking him at pick 3, you got pick 22 and pick 27. Do I want to reach 8 picks in that range when I can get Mark Andrews? I can get some really damn good guys around there. I can get Chris Olave. Chris Olave might fall a little bit. So to me, reaching for Debo is not what I'm doing. Now, if he falls to you at pick 46, doubtful that's going to happen. But if he falls, I'm taking him all the time. But that's the thing too, is you got Scary Terry there at 51. I usually reach 4 or 5 spots for him at that point. Thoughts on just taking Christian McCaffrey as a one-off, and if these guys fall in your lap, then you're taking them. How's what are you doing here if you start off with CMC, and more importantly, is it super important to stack him, a guy that you're picking 3rd overall?
I don't think it is. Christian McCaffrey is just going to be an anchor piece of your lineup regardless of whether or not you have him stacked. But I also think it's really easy to stack Christian McCaffrey because of his versatility at the position. I don't think you're doing anything terrible, but if you miss out on Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, jumping to Brian Robinson or Antonio Gibson. Yeah. Antonio Gibson specifically, right? If he picks up that J.D. McKissic role, he's essentially another wide receiver. So those two have the positional diversity to kind of not necessarily make me cringe at the fact that I have negatively correlated stat.
Yeah.
But it's Christian McCaffrey. You play him, you stack him if you can. I think you should try and stack Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin's in an interesting range where he could easily end up being your wide receiver 3 or 4 by this time.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah, and we all know his upside. We like his boomer bust potential anyways. So, getting Christian McCaffrey in that week 17 stack with Terry McLaurin is something that I'm very interested in doing if I can. But that said, I also love Jahan Dotson, man.
Dude,
I've got a bunch of Ayuk, Dotson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he played 12 games last year. He had 7 touchdowns and 523 yards. He's going to be better this year, hopefully. It all depends. Look, it all depends on Sam Howell. But Sam Howell's the guy. There's never been any rumors of anybody else Jacoby Brissett competing. This is Sam Howell's team. So to me, that means he's doing well enough that these coaches are willing to risk their careers and their jobs on this guy. So look, Brandon Ayuk is at 56. And by the way, Terry McLaurin has moved up 17 spots. Brandon Ayuk has moved up almost 25 spots over the summer. I don't know exactly why that is. There hasn't been any crazy news. I think people are just realizing this guy is the true number 1 wide receiver on this team. And Ayuk is, he's a dynamic player. How many times did Ayuk outscore Debo last year? I don't have that number on me firsthand, but I think it was a lot of games. Kittle here, 62. He's dropped a little bit. Why do you think that is?
I think it's his age. There's a really interesting narrative going on about Kittle and Kelsey specifically about how they're getting older and may not be able to fill out the stat sheet quite as much. I don't know where this is coming from. I love George Kittle. Obviously love Travis Kelsey, but we didn't say that shit about Tony Gonzalez, did we? Right? Tony Gonzalez did it for he dominated the tight end position for 15 years or whatever. These two, George Kittle and Travis Kelsey, are 2 of the best tight ends we have ever seen. And I know that his volume might change a little bit because of the emergence of Brandon Ayuk. You've got healthy CMC now. You have healthy Deebo Samuel. But what are you supposed to do as a defense? Like, how are you going to cover all that? George Kittle could just be screaming up the middle of the field, being chased by Buda Baker the entire season. Like that, that he's going to be chased by a 5'8" safety because there's so much talent on the field. So I like him. I think you got to consider your opportunity cost, obviously, who's with the people that are in that range. But again, you're not sacrificing too much. You got Trevor Lawrence, George Kittle, Chris Godwin, Cam Akers, who I hate. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Gabe Davis and Dameon Pierce. In that range, you're still not sacrificing all that much going with George Kittle. You lose out on guys like George Pickens, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. But even then, I'm not too concerned. I think you can have a decent amount of exposure. I wonder where I'm at, actually.
Yeah, and look, Kittle is one of these guys that comes on later in the season. We all know we if you can move your lineups into that week 17 final round, you're going to be going up against 1,000 people in the big contest. You're going to need these week 17 stacks, potential run backs if you want, and guys like George Kittle to me in that range are pretty decent options. So Brian Robinson Jr., Mr. 50 Cent, shot 9 times, and Antonio Gibson. Who are you going with here? They're going right around the same range. They've sort of split up a little bit. Antonio Gibson has risen about 38 spots over the summer. To me, Antonio Gibson is the guy, in my opinion. I think Brian Robinson is probably a great number one back, can get the ball, score on the goal line. But Antonio Gibson, in my opinion, is going to get quite a few pass-catching opportunities. And we all know that that's very valuable. They're only going 5 picks apart. Who are you going with here?
Earlier it was Antonio Gibson. Now I'm defaulting to a little bit more Brian Robinson Jr. Antonio Gibson was falling in a range 125 plus, so it was just easy to kind of get him there. Now I have 18% of Antonio Gibson, so I've been drafting him all summer.
Yeah.
I also have like 13% of Brian Robinson, might be closer to 15 at this point. But Brian Robinson is a guy that I'm starting to take a little bit more now, just because they're in that same range, and I think you can balance it out a little bit. I also don't think it was a terrible handcuff earlier on when Antonio Gibson was still a little bit higher in ADP. Now that they're so close together, I don't necessarily recommend it. Brian Robinson's going to be the pure runner. He will get a little bit of involvement in the pass game, I expect, because they do want to develop him, right? But Antonio Gibson, we know who he is. Like what was he, a rookie 3 years ago? He's been excellent since he's been in the league. I think that having a pure running back like Brian Robinson Jr. is really just going to help Antonio Gibson be fresher and just have those ceiling games. I like Antonio Gibson a lot. I've got a lot of exposure to him.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So we talked about Elijah Mitchell. I'm more interested in him now. I'm going to try to get more of him now. I don't think his stock is going to rise too much either, because there's not a lot of sexy news out there with him. He's just going to show up week 1 and start playing. Brock Purdy obviously is now at 151. He's one of these guys that you can wait. You can honestly, you could take Brock Purdy as like your number 1 quarterback. Like I'm not doing it that much because I like to get guys in this, round 9, 10, 11 range if I'm kind of stacking up on wide receivers and grabbing a stud running back. If I'm not going like super stud quarterback in those first few rounds, sometimes I end up with Brock Purdy as my number 1 guy. And I don't have a problem with that because you can go two in a window and you can grab a couple quarterbacks in this range. 151, he's rising, but I think he probably should be a bit higher. What quarterbacks are going around that range? You have that up.
Yeah, in that range, let's see. At quarterback, I don't think we really have much. You got Kenny Pickett at 152. You got Matt Stafford at 151, the same range, and then Jordan Love at 146.
I'll take Purdy all day.
And, I love Jordan Love. I'll be honest with you. But that's mostly because I have a shitload of Christian Watson exposure. But I love Brock Purdy, man. He's the only reason his ADP isn't higher is because we were questionable on his status coming into the season.
Yeah,
I think if we knew that he was going to start week 1, he would have been. He'd be well higher than he is, probably closer to the 120 range, up there with maybe like Russell Wilson or Geno Smith, probably. But he's got all the weapons. This is. We talked about it in Showdown last year with Jimmy G. You shouldn't be struggling with these kind of weapons. If he can't go out there and throw for 250 yards and 2-3 touchdowns every week or so, then I don't know. He fucking sucks.
And him going at 151 is a little deceiving because he had 2 or 3 months of question marks where people were taking him in that 175 range or later. That the average is not going to catch up. He could legit be being taken in the 130s right now by everybody. You know, like reaching for him, I don't think is a huge problem. Like if you think you can get him in that range, in that round 13 range, great. But like if you have to reach 10 picks on him because you there's some asshole who has, you know, George Kittle that's drafting in front of you the next round and you think he's going to snipe him, I would just take him early because, like I said, just because his ADP is at 151 doesn't mean that taking him at 140 or something like that is wrong. That's just my thought on it because the way these averages, the way the ADP works, it's not going to level out. That's not really where he truly could be going. All right, so one of the last things to talk about here is Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel, I'm getting to a lot in this range because he kind of helps clean up any run backs I might do, like any 1v1s. Like if I have Christian McCaffrey and I really want to get a Week 17 run back, usually Curtis Samuel's there. A guy like this hasn't been good in years, like realistically. Like he's not bad, but like I am really interested in seeing what he can do in this Bieniemy offense. We know he's kind of this hybrid type dude. I mean, he's like a smaller, not as good version of Debo, like kind of like the way they would use him. I've been waiting for years. I'm a Curtis Samuel stan. When is this guy going to actually have like a real breakout season, or is he just kind of going to fade off into the sunset?
I think it's more likely that he probably fades off into the sunset. But if there was a season for him to kind of get his shit together and maybe have some of those, I'm not saying he's going to go have 80 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. This could easily be like a 800-yard season with 4 to 5 touchdowns, and he has a couple spike weeks. Eric Bieniemy is going to get him involved. They have Jahan Dotson. They have the Scary Terry out there. So there's just a lot to cover. And I mean, the NFC sucks, man. The NFC, I know they got the East. They're going to have to play the Eagles twice. They're going to have to play the Cowboys twice. But outside of that, man, they're not going to be playing many tough defenses. So I think Curtis Samuel is a fine pick around where he's at. I don't know if you want to go too much higher, but you do have to be aware of some of the risks though taking Curtis Samuel, right? You got Alec Pierce is in the same range. Taysom Hill, one of my favorite random tight ends, is at 170. Dawson Knox is also right there at 175. Yeah. Jaden Reed at 175. And to be completely honest with you, by the time we get to this range, I have 6, 7 stud wide receivers. So I don't mind taking Curtis Samuel as a way to just have an extra spike week guy. But I've been doing a lot of punt tight end, and you probably heard that if you've been watching the show. So this is why I'm taking guys like Taysom Hill, Dawson Knox, or even Jake Ferguson occasionally.
Yeah, if you have like a robust running back build, or you're taking multiple quarterbacks in the first 10 rounds or something, and you need a couple extra wide receivers, this is where you probably want to grab some of these guys, especially if you have any stacks that need Curtis Samuel. So Trey Lance, we're not going to talk a whole lot about him. I was drafting him in that 140 range, and when I look at my sheets, I'll pull up a lineup here in a second. When I look at my sheets that I enter all of my data onto while I'm drafting, so I can keep track of all my drafts and stuff, and you look back, as I update the ADP, I start looking back into May, and there's just red. It's like I reached like 70 spots for him at this point. It is what it is. I don't know what's going to happen with him. Does he get traded? We haven't really seen the dude play. Like, he's been injured, yes, but would he break his ankle last year? Like, he did play against the Cardinals, I think, 2 years ago and looked pretty good. We need to see this guy play. They obviously don't believe in him, and he's like one of the most inexperienced quarterbacks like in the league almost. The dude he didn't play much in college. So my thoughts here is, can he get traded this year? And is there any more is there any reason to take Trey Lance at all, even in the 20th round? Are you interested in doing that at this point?
I don't think it's worth it anymore. It was fine earlier on when we didn't necessarily know what was going on with Brock Purdy. I do think there's a possibility Trey Lance could be traded. A team like the Raiders Jimmy G, we don't know if he's necessarily going to be Jimmy G. I am pretty sure he passed his physical and he's good to go, but that could be a team that's looking for a little bit of depth. I don't know, man. Like the problem is San Francisco passed up on a lot. They traded up to get Trey Lance. So it depends on how proud they are as a franchise or an organization. Are you going to be willing to just dump him and get what you can out of return? Or are you going to keep him on the roster in case Brock Purdy sucks? I think they believe in Brock Purdy, though. And bringing in Sam Darnold, man, I really just can't see why they would hold on to him. Worst case, I do think that he could even be a cut candidate. So I don't know, man. I don't think it's worth it. If he gets traded or like trade speculation heats up as we progress through the offseason, then maybe as a round 20 thing, but probably not.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we talked about Logan Thomas. Maybe grab him. I'm not as high on him. I don't even know if he's going to play. Like maybe he gets in week 2, week 3. I've already gotten plenty of exposure to him in the last round. I don't think I'm going to take him anymore. Juwan Jennings, I don't think I have any Juwan Jennings. I might have a 20th round Juwan Jennings with the Purdy just because I was desperate and I couldn't get a guy to stack with Purdy sort of a situation. I'm not going out of my way to draft him unless I'm stacking. Now, let's talk about some of these third, fourth string guys. Jordan Mason, TDP. I'm not taking any of these guys unless we get some news in camp that, Eli Mitchell has a setback. Then you could see Jordan Mason or TDP get some decent opportunities in the regular season if Elijah has to sit out a few games to start. But unless I get that news, I'm not taking any of these dudes. De'Ami Brown, maybe I've taken a couple picks of him. I don't know. At this point, Chris Rodriguez is probably not draftable. Anybody in this range that you would consider taking as a flyer in the 20th round just to help complete your stacks?
Excuse me. I do like Chris Rodriguez in MME. So 150 max, that's fine. Don't be drafting him really in the 20 max or single entry. That's kind of crazy. Chris Rodriguez is RB3. He is a kind of beefier guy, so he may get some goal line work. And De'Ami Brown, he'll be wide receiver 4. He's definitely a flyer that I'm comfortable taking. He's another young receiver. He has the opportunity. He has the ability to put up a touchdown or two in a game. So round 20, I don't hate him. But outside those two guys, I won't be touching Juwan Jennings, Jordan Mason, TDP. There's just too much other value in this range that I'd like to look at. And then Logan Thomas, dude, I've got a decent amount of him. I think I am done drafting him as well. Get a little bit of Cole Turner, rotate some of these other cheap tight ends. But yeah, this is just a weird range. Again, there's just other teams that I've been getting a lot more exposure to in these late rounds.
All right, let's look at a lineup that I drafted. I think this was recent. So I've got McCaffrey at pick 3, Olave at 22 overall, then Mark Andrews, then I grabbed Scary Terry, then I got Brandon Ayuk. This is a pretty nice lineup as far as correlation goes. You got San Francisco. I've got 3 dudes with the quarterback, and I got 2 run backs. Who did I get as my other run back for Washington? I got Antonio Gibson. That's perfect. You got you got Scary Terry, Antonio Gibson, PPR monsters, along with some of the best players on the team for San Francisco. I did do a handcuff here with CMC and Elijah Mitchell. I don't know that I was necessarily planning that. I'm not going out of my way to do that for best ball, especially with a high-end dude. If I've got Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman, I have no problem getting both of those guys. But your number 1 overall pick number 3, if he goes down, you might be in a little bit of trouble, but you could probably recover if it's a 1 or 2 game situation. Besides that, I got a Vegas stack. I got Detroit. I haven't been getting to a lot of Detroit, unfortunately, because I feel like the guys are just never there. The only guy that's ever there is Jameson Williams, and I'm not too high on him right now. He's kind of scaring me with what's going on in camp. What jumps out to here? This is a punt quarterback times 3, anchor running back. Of course, I got my wide receiver 5 by round 10, and I got an elite tight end. This is a 3-7-7-3. Anything interesting jump out to you here?
I think it's important to look at your build structure here, because you have CMC and Eli stacked together, right? You did go a little bit heavier on running back, and your wide receivers you have 7, which Chris Olave is going to be wide receiver 1 every week.
Yeah,
and then Terry and Michael Pittman, Cortland, they can obviously alternate so that you're not 100% dependent on Brandon Ayuk. But with that being said, I fucking love Brandon Ayuk this year, man. Like, I probably like him too much. I think I have like 20%. He's one of my highest owned wide receivers at this point.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm actually getting. I was like, man, I don't have a ton of Ayuk. I feel like I have a decent amount, and I look back and I got like 15%, and I'm at like 210 drafts at this point. So, do the math. That's quite a few drafts. All right, Ellie. So, thoughts on overall this combination of stack for Week 17? Talk a little bit about, you know, if you're just tuning in, how important that Week 17 stack is, and how important is the run back. Like, I get stacking good teams for that Week 17. Do you have to go crazy with the run back? Because look, in normal DFS, sometimes you just don't need the run back, right? So what are your thoughts on that real quick as we wrap this up?
Look, stacking's fun. I think it's important to kind of help simplify your construction builds. It's real easy to just randomly pick people off the board. Stacking at least gives you some framework to operate within, even if it might be it might not necessarily be the most optimal thing you can do, which I think we have the data that shows it is pretty optimal.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting game to stack simply because there's enough people spaced throughout the entire draft. It's not Minnesota where you draft, if you don't get Justin Jefferson or Addison, you're kind of just screwed or whatever, right? There's a couple teams where if you don't get the guys in the top 20, you're just not drafting again. So the Eagles, that's a great
Detroit too.
Yeah, Detroit. So look, man, it's important to kind of help simplify your builds, and especially if you're doing MME. If you're doing MME, it's just an easier way to draft. If you're only doing 1 or 2 lineups, then I wouldn't necessarily get too crazy about it. You probably want to draft the team that's going to have the absolute most points you can possibly think of.
All right, guys, we will see you on the next show. This is show 7, so what do we got? 9 shows left. We're ripping through this. I think we got about 21 days left. There's 3 weeks. I'm pretty excited, man. We've got some showdown to talk about. We're doing, you and I are just off air doing some preseason right now. So hit that subscribe button, like this video if you guys are enjoying it. Comment down below what you like about our series here, anything you want to see differently, and who are some of your sleepers from these teams that you're drafting in your drafts. We'll see you guys later.